So, for the sake of starting a discussion, I think it's very interesting that you bring this scenario of change in the relationship between artists and the urban context where they work. And I find it particularly curious when in previous sessions we have always been looking at history, and so looking at how, in a sort of a museum culture has been made around the work of artists. But this represents a major shift in terms of the artists more interacting in the city and outside of the gallery space, which seems to be also a commentary on the autonomy of art, and suddenly also in a more direct relationship to contexts. So I would like to hear you about that, and how do you understand these projects in regards to this idea of autonomy or specific sites for artistic production? And also, how do you work with the artists? Because we were just mentioning before that it's not necessarily the case that you're commissioning artists to do certain projects, but just inviting them to interact with a certain context.
Well, of course, thank you very much. Of course, this displacement is not easy to anybody. It's much easier to work in a safe environment where you have the conditions under control. But also, you have to take into account that the institutional spaces in Brazil are not that stable, and they are not very. They are few. They don't have many laboratorial projects, chances to experiment, to change. They make traditional exhibitions, and for artists, they have to look for a chance to experiment, and this must be outside the museum space. But that doesn't mean that they will be comfortable in that situation. When the problem of working in urban space is the problem that the visual condition is under check. So and this is basic for artists. If you cannot recognize and map the situation by looking at, it puts the artist in a very anguish situation. He tries to translate the space to visual perception. When this is not possible, it's a big problem. But it's a big problem to everybody living in the city. I don't know anyone born in São Paulo that don't get lost just by going from here to there. Because if you don't have a GPS with you, so there is not a mental map of the city that is possible to have by experience, which is different from here. So this is very important to art creation and art perception. The collapse of the visual experience. This is one thing. So to work in situations like that, in scales like that, you cannot work alone. The project must be collective. You gotta work with other people. You gotta work with an urbanist, an architect, or an engineer, or people from the neighborhood, the organizations, the city, companies, and it is impossible to imagine that one artist by himself will develop and create a work that has meaning. So this is not also something that artists are used to. Our modernist tradition is very individualistic.
I had a sort of follow-up question to that. Just thinking about the role of art, I guess it's kind of an interstitial space between. I mean, I know very little about the Brazilian context, I admit, but at least here there is this idea that art often is a kind of spearhead of gentrification. So, and so art can play the role of being on the side of the city, or it can be on the side of the people. It seems to me, right? It could go either way. So it could either, I'm sure also in Brazil there are probably public art projects that function
it's not more
not democratically, right? And then on the other side there's. So I'm just wondering how you negotiate that space. Also, I guess financially, I'm just curious where does the funding come from? How do you negotiate? It seems very complicated.
Very complicated, because you don't get funds to prepare, to develop projects and proposals, anything like that. And you almost never have cash. You negotiate with companies and things, work and materials. They will help you, but they will not give you money. If you need to buy something, you want to work. So the artists, they have also to adapt themselves to what is disposable. You cannot work with wood, but you can work with plastic because they are giving you plastic. So work with that. In a scale, this makes a huge difference. You are not making an object. So it's important to have this in account. But also, you have to deal with disillusion of people do not understand what you're doing, do not respect what you're doing. You are not the artist in the place. You are just somebody, one more people doing things in that area where many other people are doing things also. So this condition is not for everybody to stand like that. No, I also think of, I've been studying Serra, the relation of Richard Serra with public space. He also, it was also a very traumatic experience. And he actually, after Tilted Arc, he never came back to the public space. But this happened with many artists, that they cannot stand, actually, something that is too far away, conflictive, and difficult. So, if you do not organize yourself in order to have an approach to the city that has a background, that you are sustained in that action, is impossible. It's just impossible.
Nelson, you had mentioned that many projects serve as, in Arte Cidade over the years, served as prototypes for like proposals for the city. Did you see how is this communication done in terms of like city officials looking at projects and being involved in the process so that there's room for them embracing a project or?
Yeah. Of course, it could be better also. Always could be better. But also, I think that public administration is changing all over. It's changing. They are not working with the traditional modern idea of plan. I have a clear proposition to the city. We should design this and build this. This is clever. This is what the future is. I know that. Le Corbusier and Niemeyer, they all worked with that. This does not work. Just It didn't work. People go to Brazil expecting to see a modern country from modern. It's nothing. Brazil is a failure, completely failure as a city. So to make to make another step, to understand that the real city is what exists and not the plan. That you have to deal with what is there, and what is there is overwhelming. It's huge and very difficult. This change made a new generation of architects and artists. They don't deal with utopian ideas anymore. They deal with the real condition. This is a cultural major transformation. And all the public administration shares this point of view now. So it's getting better, or it's getting more realistic, but it's getting better.
I was just thinking about one comparison between São Paulo and New York, because I think people generally think of São Paulo as the Brazilian equivalent to New York, but obviously it's different in many ways. And one thing is tourism, because New York has become a huge magnet for tourists. I mean, like over 50 million tourists. I think most of them are Brazilians, but and that has a real effect on cultural institutions. More than half of our visitors are tourists. Yeah. The High Line has clearly become a big tourist attraction, you know, Lincoln Center. But you're dealing with a situation where, maybe except for this month because of the World Cup, tourism is relatively minor.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question, because Brazil actually is understood as a beautiful country and everything, right? But it's not touristic. It's very little touristic destination, very small number, very. So Paris has, by itself, has 20 times more tourists than Brazil, the whole country. So it's amazing that we are not exposed to foreigners. So the World Cup was a chance to a lot of people go there, and actually was interesting to see what was discussed there because of that. The idea that we should be a tourist haven as you are, so everything should be clean, working, and understandable to foreigners and things. What is okay? But we just don't have this infrastructure. We don't have. So in order to provide an experience of the city, you must have a different strategy or different procedures, and understand this as good as anything else. We will never have a high land. This is impossible. It's too clean. It's too organized. It's just, no. Maybe in the future, but not. But this is not the best of the country. No? No. So this was an interesting discussion. What is our organized World Cup mean? What is this? So, I don't know if the future of all cities will be through tourism.
I wanted to ask, sorry, have you not finished? About, you talked a little bit about tension, and I wasn't sure where the tension and hostility was coming from that you referred to, and I wanted to know whether, as a result of your projects, you'd had problems with different sectors, and particular sectors like, state or local government or even federal government, or the communities that live around where you were doing projects, and whether there have been conflicts as a result of the works that you've been doing.
of course, we have a government from the left, the Lula, changing a lot of the inclusion. Social inclusion was huge. 30 million people became consumers in the last 5 years, more or less. This is bigger than many European countries. This is very important. So people have now different demands also. It's a culture change out of this new position. People have access or have money to have access to this thing, but don't have service. You have more money, but the public transportation is horrible, traffic jams, the schools are awful, the hospitals, so you cannot buy those things. So this is a big problem there. So this is one thing. And also the idea that you have to be recognized for what you are. So Rio, for example, this is an important thing for you. Rio has many favelas within the city because of the hills. The hills are close to the sea. And the favelas occupy a very nice area of the city with view to the sea. And but because they are high, there is this exclusion. What was done lately? Elevators, very big, clean, new elevators connecting the Ipanema beach to the favelas in 1 minute, moving out. So they go to the beach. They go to it very easily. Instead of walking all the way down, they go to the beach immediately. This was a huge change in the way people understand each other. You go there. Now you go there. There are bars there. You can go. Many tourists go there, which was unthinkable a few years ago. So little things like you have this bondinhos, the
Trams.
that
Cable cars.
cable car in huge favelas now in Rio. That is a main subject. This means access and combining people from different areas. They can go here and you can go there. So more and more I see this as an important infrastructure in the city, as a cultural element, political and social element. It's not just the equipment in itself. Its meaning is different. Again, the discussion about where the subway stations should be built.
I wanted to go back to the types of artistic expressions that were represented in the Cidade project a long time, because there seems to be, for me, interestingly, this, I wouldn't say opposition, but this complementarity between media that have been very traditional in portraying the city, like photography, which you have worked with a lot, photographers, artists, such as photography, but then also new expressions that come out of a more popular expression. I don't know if, like graffiti, that feels like a very strong expression in São Paulo. How do you think this is changing, and what is the relative importance of these different practices?
This is another very interesting thing also. Portable media became extremely important. Everybody has a cell phone. Very little people have fixed phone. That was very expensive. It's much cheaper to have a cell phone. So this changed the way people will communicate with each other. 5 years ago, I would take a train to go to the East Zone, and everybody was there. That's it. Today, everybody is like here. Everybody's connecting and talking to somebody inside the trains. It takes 1 hour. 1 hour to go from downtown to the east side of the city. So this will. But another question: which is the relationship between the connections, in network connections, and public space, the physical public space? What one thing will help the other thing to organize? In those areas, in the East Zone, there is no designed public space like square. People will make by use the door of a train station, a bar, and a football field. Those will be public space. The discussion lately, a few months ago, was to build towers for wireless access. The city was discussing where to put the towers. The idea was to put the towers in a public space. What is a public space? That was a very interesting discussion coming from the public administration to discuss what a public space is, because they had to put the tower in somewhere. So how will you say? Well, so the discussion is, public space is what you say is a public space, or is where people get together in order to build this was one of the most interesting discussions I've seen in São Paulo lately. Where to put the towers?
But you were saying that this relates to new media, to new forms of expression, I guess. And but what about other popular expressions that also take? Are artists getting involved with that, like graffiti, very specifically? Is that still important, or is it?
It became more sophisticated, like the twins guys, and they are not painting the airplanes and everything. But I think the graffiti became part of the urban war, basically. So it's a kind of signature of gangs, basically. I have the control of that territory, so I put my sign over there. So it has less to do with art and more to do with this fight. I don't know if it's. I think that art creation for media is more important now in terms of innovation, new things, or music, or
film through
less
mobile
to,
devices?
yeah, pictures, how to combine pictures with films and poems. So I think this is more creative now than the actual physical graffiti.
And coming back to the question of photography, you have worked with a lot of photographers, right? So why was that so important? Of course, it has to do with representation of the city.
I think it still is. Now in August, we're going to start a work with 3 photographers picturing public spaces, 12 areas. Arnaldo Papalardo, I don't know if you know, Mauro Restife, that was.
He was here in New York as well.
Yeah.
The Aperture Foundation.
And a very young photographer that's called Pio Figueroa, that he belongs to a collective called Cia de Foto, Company of Photo. So there are three different generations working with different techniques, and the main challenge is work with the problem of opacity. The problem of seeing comes to a photographer immediately. How to picture São Paulo? It's extremely difficult. It's very difficult. What kind of strategy? How will you proceed? What are you gonna do? So the main idea is to work their embate, their fight with the space, with this question mark. Is it still possible to look at São Paulo, or is a lost battle? So I'm really interested in see what will come out.
I don't totally understand this loss of vision. So before, you think there was?
There was,
you were able to see, but now you're not. And what
yeah,
changed?
it's a strange thing, but I sustain this kind of idea.
When the city was more kind of planned and modernist, or what is
was
more contained,
was more organized to you to walk in the city and to visualize the buildings, the organization of the streets, and from your body position, you would more or less understand the scale and the organization of the thing. Now they took out the city, the street doesn't work this way anymore, has a huge expressway crossing, dismantling the buildings, and so as you cannot have a vision of the city from your point of view. That's the problem.
Like the city is a space that's commensurable to the body or not. So you're saying it's...
There is a disruption in that relationship. So what people usually do is to have overviews or to make collage of things, or to take a car and make many big pictures and then put them together. Different strategies to operate, but they don't have to do with your individual experience.
Maybe it's easier actually to understand that when you consider that in New York, because there is a grid, it's very easy to orient yourself.
Very easy.
And it becomes very stable.
Yeah.
In São Paulo, you neither have the grid and things have overlapped over time, so you lose references, and it creates a sort of visual explosion that is much more complicated to do.
I think also it's something like in Mexico City, these cities that have huge traffic problems. There's no relationship between the actual distance and the time that it takes to make the transit. It's entirely dependent upon the amount of traffic. Yeah. So it's very hard to sort of like get a mental map because depending on the time of day, it could take you 20 minutes or 2 hours, to make the same distance.
Yeah. Frederick Jameson says a lot of things about that also. And I've been in New York many times, but always struck me when people say, if you go west or east, it was a natural way of locating itself. If you say this in São Paulo, go west. There is no such directions. It's not possible. So.
Not every part of New York has the grid. I was in Brooklyn this morning.
That's true.
Don't know if someone had told me to go west. Where
Can I ask one question about how you select the artists? It just occurred to me, I was quite intrigued that you're going to work with Mauro Restife because your project seems so engaged, with the now, with contemporary, and although I don't know his work very well, from his talk that we saw the day before yesterday, it seemed like his work was very much to do with confusing time, and the images that he makes. You could be looking at something from the 1920s or from today. So I'm quite interested in to hear more about your selections and about that one in particular.
Well, of course, the selection is always very personal and has to do with the history of those people, what they've been working with and everything. But the most important, I think, is the process of creation. The last Art Cidade took 4 years of preparation. It's a lot of time, 4 years. Many artists gave up. I have other things to do. Bye-bye. No. This happened a lot also.
More process of deselection than selection.
Yeah, and so we have to have excursions, going to the place, discussing the place. We have a team of urbanists that make a first mapping, studying of the area. We indicate critical situations that will be interesting to the artists to know. They will suggest areas that we didn't think about. Right? There's that also. So you take into account. They will develop after that. They will develop proposals. Those proposals will be negotiated with all kind of supporters, and permissions will have to be negotiated. So it takes a long time. Everything changes in meanwhile. So sometimes the spaces are not the way they were anymore. Sometimes the artists change their idea. They want to do something different at the end. So
can I ask, how does the time frame work? Is it kind of like a festival that happens over a period of a few months?
No. We try to organize when it's ready, go. Basically that.
I wondered, because you talked about this kind of 4-year planning process as if there was a kind of cumulative
No,
effect.
you cannot say it's going to happen that day. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Because for sure it's not going to work.
Right. Any other
questions about? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's still an ordinance in São Paulo, but I remember in 2007 there was a no logo law that was approved, and therefore, or advertising in the streets was forbidden. I don't know if it's still.
Yeah.
So
it's forbidden.
I was reading about that back in Europe back in the days, and I was curious to hear about the impact of that.
Huge.
Of that decision on the art community, and if in the process of appropriation of the public space.
Well,
if there was any.
That's a good question. I don't know if there were many artists working with billboards or something. Mm-hmm. There is always, but not that much. So they are not doing this anymore. Although advertising is forbidden, but a work of art would be negotiable.
Did people get this?
No, billboard.
There was a law that forbade any large-scale advertising in São Paulo state. It's not the whole of Brazil, right? It's just São Paulo.
It's only São Paulo city.
Yeah, São Paulo
because
city.
there was a problem with visual pollution. And now
but it wasn't totally forbidden. It was they gave maximum dimensions, so everybody had to redo their signage, and people were exhilarated, right, with
it's just,
the residents.
Yeah, it's much better.
This guy was reelected just because of this law, I think.
Sometimes people, they were a tourist attraction also, because some lingerie outdoors, huge in the city was.
To Times Square.
With Giselle Beiguelman. But not anymore.
So those
billboards that remained empty. Nobody tried to work with that, like
They were dismantled.
dismantled. So
Yeah. Many of them were in the empty facades of buildings, by the side of the buildings. But they are empty now. But as an artist, you can do. I don't think they will do anything to.
There was a huge project in the early 80s in Recife called Art Door, and billboards are called Outdoor in Brazil, and they had maybe 300 of these outdoors designated for artistic intervention. So it was organized by Paulo Bruschi, and it was like a huge project for the city. Very nice.
There wasn't one in São Paulo about maybe 20 years ago too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there was like can't remember. There was even a catalog for it. And,
I like them. Sometimes in the highways, in the pillars below the highways, they do shows, pictures, photography, many signs. It's a lively scene for that, but it's a smaller scale.
Are there any further questions?
Thank you. It was very interesting. These were